Pina, bonjour. Hello, everyone. My name is Julianna Morin. My pronouns are they, she. I am a member of the Bonashare Algonquin First Nation, affiliated with the Algonquins of Ontario. I am a registered social worker and psychotherapist in private practice here in Omamwe Anishinaabe, the traditional unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe First Nations. And I'm honored to be championing Celeste Ng's newest book, Our Missing Hearts, in this year's Ottawa Valley Reads. I first fell in love with Celeste Ng's work a few years ago when I read her novel Little Fires Everywhere, and pretty quickly I went back to read her debut novel, Everything I Never Told You. I was so thrilled to be gifted a signed copy of Our Missing Hearts for the winter holidays this past year, and it was really great to finally be able to dig into it and be able to share what I loved about it with all of you. I would say that Our Missing Hearts is definitely within the realm of a speculative fiction novel. There is a lot about the world in this book that echoes very familiarly with the world that we find ourselves living in today. And there are also aspects of that world that are really dialed up to 11, particularly some of the dystopian elements. Essentially, the world that we find ourselves in with Our Missing Hearts is in America, where a piece of all-encompassing, all-sweeping racist legislation has been put into place. The law itself is called PACT, so it's for the preservation of American culture and values. And basically, what the legislation does, in effect, is control the liberties and freedoms of Asian American individuals and families, because misinformation and anti-Asian racism has been at the center of a recent financial crisis in this world, in the United States. And that legislation has quickly gone into effect in the midst of that financial crisis to attempt to redress some of the things that are going on. Again, Celeste Ng, a Chinese American author herself, makes it really clear that a lot of the misinformation that is recognizable to a lot of us in the world today, I think, that misinformation was at the heart of that legislation being passed, and it's not actually true. So now folks find themselves within this world. One of the main things that the legislation does is the removal of children from homes that are deemed to be against PACT or subversive or like conspiring with Asian families in some way. Those children are removed from those homes. And Celeste Ng does do a wonderful job in the acknowledgments of this book, describing how the political, legislated removal of children from homes has been a tactic of oppression throughout history. We know that those oppressive realities are happening with real families in the world we live in today. Specifically for our Canadian context, it's important for me to name here that we know from Stats Canada and from the endless work of Cindy Blackstock and the First Nations Family and Children Caring Society that over 53% of children in the child welfare system in Canada are Indigenous. There are more Indigenous children currently in care than at the height of the 60s scoop. We're in a period of the ongoing millennial scoop, and it's a humanitarian crisis in this country. Celeste Ng picks up on pieces of that and expands that crisis in the world of Our Missing Hearts. as much as there is this really scary dystopian world that the characters are in Our Missing Hearts, there's also really vibrant, really powerful, and thought-provoking resistance to that oppression and to that harm and hurt. The main character of the story, Bird, is a young teen boy. His best friend, Sadie, is a child who has been removed from her home because her parents were politically active against PACT legislation, and she's been forcibly taken away and relocated. Bird's mother, Margaret, is a poet and activist and storyteller, and she has elected to leave Bird and Bird's father. She's chosen to leave her family because of the political risk that she brings to her family under this racist legislation. So throughout the book, Bird is getting coded messages from her and reminders of his family before PACT that are really calling to him and drawing to him. He hears Sadie's story about running away from foster homes that she's forcibly placed in, about trying desperately to find her own family. And we also, in like a really lovely meta way, in this novel, we hear about a radical network of librarians who are using the written word and literature and love of learning, love of reading, love of curiosity to try to help connect missing children and forcibly remove children, reconnecting them to their families of origin, to their parents. I'd like to read just a small section of Our Missing Hearts, just to give folks some insight into Celeste Ng's beautiful turns of phrase and the really lovely story that lives within these pages. You'd have to be a lunatic, Bird had agreed, to overturn PACT. PACT had helped end the crisis. PACT kept things peaceful and safe. Even kindergartners knew that. PACT was common sense, really. If you acted unpatriotic, there would be consequences. If you didn't, then what were you worried about? And if you saw or heard of something unpatriotic, it was your duty to let the authorities know. He has never known a world without PACT. It is as axiomatic as gravity, or thou shalt not kill. He didn't understand why anyone would oppose it. What any of this had to do with hearts, how a heart could be missing. How could you survive without your heart beating inside you? It made no sense until he met Sadie, who'd been removed from her home and replaced because her parents had protested PACT. Didn't you know, she'd said, what the consequences were? Bird, come on. She tapped the worksheet they'd been given as homework. The 3 pillars of PACT. Outlaws promotion of un-American values and behavior. Requires all citizens to report potential threats to our society. And there, beneath Sadie's finger, protects children from environments espousing harmful views. Even then, he hadn't wanted to believe it. Maybe there were a few PACT removals, but they couldn't happen much. Or why did no one talk about it? Sure, every now and then you heard of a case like Sadie, but surely those were exceptions. If it happened, you really must have done something dangerous. Your kid needed to be protected from you and whatever you were doing or saying. What's next, some people said. You think molesters and child beaters deserve to keep their kids too? He'd said this to Sadie without thinking, and she went silent. Then she wadded up her sandwich in a ball of tuna and mayonnaise and smashed it into his face. By the time he wiped his eyes clear, she was gone, and all afternoon the stink of fish clung to his hair and skin. A few days later, Sadie pulled something from her backpack. Look, she'd said, the first words she'd spoken to him since. Bird, look what I found. A newspaper, corners tattered, ink smudged to gray, almost 2 years old already. And there, just below the fold, a headline. Local poet tied to insurrections. His mother's photo, a dimple hovering at the edge of her smile. Around him, the world went hazy and gray. Where did you get this, he asked, and Sadie shrugged. At the library. Once again, I really just can't say enough wonderful things about Celeste Ng's Our Missing Hearts. There are pieces that, as a social worker myself, my profession having its origins in colonial nation state building, and being agents of the state, enacting oppression, being complicit in enacting oppression. There's a lot to learn from Celeste Ng's work that she's gifted us. There's so much for us to take in and be mindful of. And she really highlights a fulsome resource list for doing more learning on our parts at the back, which again just feels like such a gift. But she also really describes the powerful impact that individuals can have when we join together to mitigate the harmful impacts of our privileges, to divest from our privileges and decenter them, and to just have common empathy and understanding, doing something radical and beautiful just with our words, just with our art, just with our time, just with our patience. I hope that I've done Celeste Ng so well as a champion. Gitshi miigwech for listening. Please go check out Our Missing Hearts. Miigwech.